Hey guys, tonight we are going to attempt the impossible. We aren't conquering Gaul, and we aren't draining the Pontine marshes. No, we are doing something far more stressful and administratively complex. We are going to properly fold and wear a Roman toga without having a nervous breakdown. Imagine wrapping yourself in a heavy wool rug the size of a small studio apartment, arranging it with mathematical precision, and then trying to walk down a crowded street under the blazing Mediterranean sun without looking like your unmade bed. Honestly, you probably won't survive this, not because of gladiators or political intrigue, but because of the sheer heat exhaustion of wearing 6 yards of dense fabric in the middle of August. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also drop a comment letting me know where you're curling up from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. I always love seeing the map fill up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing in a field in southern Italy. It is early spring, the air is crisp, but the sun is already hinting at the oppressive weight it will carry in a few months. You aren't in the marble-clad forum just yet. There are no columns here, no senators shouting about grain subsidies, and definitely no perfume. In fact, the smell hitting your nose right now is the exact opposite of sophistication. It is a heavy, earthy, pungent cocktail of mud manure and the distinct, oily musk of several hundred sheep. You trudge through the tall grass, your sandals sinking slightly into the soft earth. This is where the majesty of Rome begins, not with a decree from the Senate, but here, in the shearing shed of a wealthy estate in Apulia. The noise is deafening. It's a chaotic chorus of bleating, the sharp bark of working dogs, and the low murmurs of shepherds speaking a dialect of Latin that sounds more like gargling pebbles than the oratory of Cicero. You approach the holding pen. The sheep here look different than the ones you might expect. They look remarkably pampered for farm animals. These are the prized Tarentine sheep, the producers of the finest luxury wool in the empire. You notice something strange, a detail that seems almost absurd given the mud and the muck. A quirky little historical detail that feels made up but isn't. These sheep are wearing coats. Yes, actual leather jackets strapped over their fleece. This is to keep their wool exquisitely clean and soft, protecting it from brambles and dirt. It's the ancient equivalent of wrapping your sofa in plastic, except the sofa is alive and currently screaming at you. You watch a shepherd grab one of these jacketed aristocrats. He wrestles the animal onto a low wooden platform. The sheep kicks for a moment, hooves clattering against the wood, before resigning itself to the inevitable. You step closer, leaning in to inspect the raw material of your future toga. The shepherd unbuckles the protective leather coat, peeling it back to reveal the fleece underneath. It is thick, creamy, and undeniably dense. You reach out a hand tentatively and press your fingers into the wool. It doesn't feel like a soft sweater, not yet. It feels greasy. Your fingers come away coated in a yellowish, waxy substance. This is lanolin, the natural oil secreted by the sheep's skin to waterproof the wool. It's sticky and smells heavily of animal musk. In 1,000 years, people will put this stuff in fancy hand lotions and charge a fortune for it. But right now, it just feels like you've dipped your hand in lukewarm butter that's been left out in a barn. The shepherd picks up his tool. It's a pair of iron shears, forfex, consisting of 2 sharp blades connected by a C-shaped spring handle. They look simple, almost primitive, and they gleam with a thin coating of olive oil to prevent rust. There is a rhythmic, hypnotic sound as he begins to work. Snip, snip, snip. The metal creates a satisfying dull click as the blades meet, slicing through the dense mat of fibres. The fleece peels away from the sheep's pink skin in one heavy, continuous sheet, rolling off the animal like a heavy carpet. You stand there, mesmerised by the repetition. The shepherd is efficient, his movements practiced and fluid. He has to be. One slip of the hand would nick the skin, and blood stains on white wool are notoriously difficult to remove. A headache the fullers down the line would charge extra for. You watch the pile of raw wool grow on the floor. It looks incredibly heavy. And this brings us to a mainstream historical fact that most movies get wrong. The Roman toga was almost exclusively made of wool. Hollywood loves to dress actors in billowing, silky sheets that catch the breeze, but a real toga was a massive, heavy woolen garment. It was hot in the summer, heavy in the winter, and smelled like wet dog when it rained. As you look at the heap of raw fleece, you start to understand the physical burden of Roman citizenship. This isn't just clothing, it's an endurance test. The shepherd finishes with the first sheep and pushes the animal away. It skitters off, looking naked and slightly offended, to join its shorn companions. The fleece left behind is bundled up. You try to lift it. It's substantial. This single fleece isn't enough for a whole toga, of course. A standard toga requires a massive amount of material. Some historians estimate the final cloth was roughly semicircular, with a diameter of up to 18 feet. That means you need the wool from multiple sheep just to clothe one senator. You watch as the workers sort the wool. This is a critical step. They separate the softest, finest wool from the neck and shoulders. This will be for the high-status garments, from the coarser, scratchier stuff around the legs and tail, which will end up as rough tunics for the labourers, or perhaps winter blankets for the legions. Historians still argue whether the Romans had a standardised grading system for wool quality akin to our modern merino classifications, or if it was entirely based on the subjective touch of the head shepherd. Watching them work, feeling the fibres between their calloused thumb and forefinger, it seems to be an art form rather than a science. The air in the shed is thick with dust motes, dancing in the shafts of sunlight, cutting through the wooden slats. You breathe in the dry, fibrous air, tasting the lanolin. It's a peaceful, repetitive scene. Snip, click, roll, snip, click, roll. The mountains of creamy, greasy wool are growing higher, ready to be packed into burlap sacks. You realise, looking at this sticky, yellow-grey mountain of fluff, that it looks nothing like the gleaming white robes you see on statues. It's dirty, it's full of burrs, bits of straw, and dead insects that got trapped despite the leather jackets. It is raw and unapologetically organic. To turn this greasy pile into the symbol of imperial power is going to take a lot more than a simple wash. It's going to require chemistry, footwork, and a stomach strong enough to handle some truly questionable liquids. You wipe the lanolin from your fingers onto your own tunic, leaving a faint, shiny streak. The sheep have done their part. They are now naked and shivering slightly in the breeze, while you are left with the harvest. The sacks are tied shut with rough hemp rope. You help hoist one onto a cart, feeling the dense weight of it settling onto your shoulder. This is the burden you asked for. The cart creaks under the load, the wheels groaning as they begin to turn. We are leaving the pastoral quiet of the farm behind. The wool has to go to the city. It has to go to the industrial district. It has to be purged. You leave the rolling green hills and the shearing sheds behind. Following the cart as it rumbles toward the outskirts of the city, the air changes. The fresh, grassy scent of the countryside is replaced by something denser, heavier, and significantly more watering to the eyes. You are entering the industrial heart of the textile trade, the domain of the Fullonis, the fullers. If you thought the sheep pen smelled earthy, you might want to hold your breath for this next part. You are standing outside a large open-air workshop, a Fullonica. Before you even step across the threshold, the smell hits you like a physical wall. It is sharp, stinging, and undeniably familiar. It's the scent of stale ammonia, magnified 1,000 times by the heat of the day. You check your sandals to make sure you haven't stepped in anything. But no, this scent is atmospheric. It is the smell of cleanliness, Roman style. You trudge inside, your eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the high windows. The floor is slippery with water and alkaline suds. The noise is rhythmic, a heavy, wet thumping that vibrates through the soles of your feet. You look toward the source of the sound and see a row of small stalls, almost like heavy clay niched tubs built into the ground. Inside each tub stands a man, his tunic tucked high into his belt or entirely removed, submerged up to his knees in a murky, frothy liquid. These men are the human washing machines of the ancient world. They are performing the Saltus Fullonicus, the fuller's dance. They march in place, lifting their legs high and stomping down with grim determination. Splish, stomp, splish, stomp. They hold onto the sides of the stalls to keep their balance as they trample the raw wool you just saw harvested. You step closer to one of the tubs, carefully, so as not to get splashed. You peer into the liquid, swirling around the workers' ankles. It isn't water. Well, not just water. Remember that sticky, greasy lanolin that coated your hands in the shearing shed? Water alone won't strip that away. To break down that heavy sheep grease, the Romans needed a powerful degreasing agent. They didn't have Tide Pods or synthetic detergents, but they did have chemistry, and they knew that when human urine is allowed to sit and ferment, the urea breaks down into ammonia. And ammonia is fantastic at dissolving grease. So, yes, you are standing in a room full of men stomping on wool soaked in fermented urine. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Roman laundry industry was powered almost entirely by pee. It was such a valuable commodity that vessels were placed on street corners for passers-by to relieve themselves in, a civic contribution to the clothing industry. The contents were collected daily and brought here to the Fullonica to be aged to peak potency. You watch the worker nearest to you. He looks exhausted. This is brutal cardiovascular labour, essentially doing high-knees aerobics in chemical sludge for 10 hours a day. He gives you a weary nod, sweat dripping from his forehead into the tub, adding just a little more salinity to the mix. There is a quirky historical tidbit about this liquid gold. The trade in urine was so lucrative that the Emperor Vespasian actually placed a tax on it. When his son, Titus, complained that taxing bodily functions was a bit beneath the dignity of the crown, Vespasian reportedly held up a gold coin collected from the tax and asked his son to smell it. "Does it smell?" he asked. Titus admitted it did not. "And yet," Vespasian replied, "it comes from urine." This gave rise to the phrase pecunia non olet, money doesn't stink. Standing here in the fullery, however, you can confirm that while the money might not stink, literally everything else does. The worker steps out of the tub, his legs red and irritated from the harsh chemicals. He hauls the heavy, wet wool out with him. The fabric is now greyish and sodden, but the grease is gone. The lanolin has been chemically stripped, leaving the fibres open and raw. Now comes the rinsing. You follow the process to a series of large stone basins fed by lead pipes gushing fresh aqueduct water. The sound of running water is soothing after the wet slap of the stomping tubs. Here, the wool is rinsed, squeezed and beaten. But we aren't done yet. A Roman toga, specifically the toga pura worn by the average citizen, needs to be white. Not just off-white, but a bright, socially acceptable white. The urine wash has cleaned it, but the wool still has a natural creamy yellowish tint. To fix this, you walk to the back of the workshop, where a different kind of smell hangs in the air, the acrid, choking scent of burning brimstone. You see a large wicker frame shaped like a bell. The damp cloth is draped over it. Underneath, a worker places a pot of sulphur and lights it. Pale yellow-green smoke begins to curl up, passing through the weave of the fabric. This is the bleaching chamber. The sulphur dioxide fumes react with the moisture in the wool to bleach it white. It's a dangerous job. The fumes are toxic and burn the throat. You cough slightly, covering your mouth with the edge of your own tunic, feeling a stinging sensation in your nose. There is a scholarly debate that surfaces here among economic historians. Some argue that the fullers were a despised underclass, social pariahs forced to live on the fringes because of the smell and the nature of their work. Others argue that they were actually powerful, wealthy guildsmen who took immense pride in their chemical knowledge, evident by the fact that they dedicated statues to Minerva and had prime seating at the theatre. Looking at the complexity of this operation, the plumbing, the chemical supply chains, the sheer volume of cloth, you get the sense that, smell notwithstanding, this is a serious, high-stakes business. Once the sulphur has done its work, the cloth is removed. It is whiter now, gleaming dully in the dim light, but the texture is wrong. It's felted and matted from the stomping. You watch as the workers hang the fabric on a drying rack. Now comes the finishing touch. A man approaches the cloth with a strange tool, a wooden board set with the dried, spiky heads of the teasel plant or perhaps the skin of a hedgehog. He begins to brush the fabric. Scritch, scratch, scritch, scratch. He is raising the nap, pulling up the tiny fibre ends to make the wool soft and fuzzy. After he raises the nap, another worker uses massive shears to trim it down, perfectly level. This is what makes Roman wool feel like velvet rather than a scouring pad. You reach out to touch the finished product hanging on the rack. It is transformed. The greasy, yellow fleece from the farm is gone. In its place is a dense, creamy white fabric that feels soft, substantial, and clean. It still smells faintly of sulphur, a lingering reminder of its chemical bath, but that will fade. You take a step back, feeling the damp humidity of the room clinging to your skin. You have survived the smell of the Fullonica. You have witnessed the transformation of nature into culture, of sheep hair into civilization. The cloth is ready. It is clean. It is white. But right now it is just a flat piece of fabric. It has no shape, no form. It is naked potential. To turn this into a garment, you're going to need to start with the basics. You can't just throw this heavy wool over your bare skin. That would be chafing suicide. You need a barrier. You need a foundation. You need to leave the toxic fumes of the laundry district and find something a little more breathable to wear underneath it all. You leave the sulphurous haze of the Fullonica and step back into the street. The air clears, or at least it clears as much as Roman air ever does. You take a deep breath, thankful that your lungs are no longer being assaulted by brimstone, even if the scent of garlic and wood smoke isn't exactly a field of lavender. Before we even look at the massive bolt of white wool you just helped manufacture, we need to address a critical logistical issue. You are standing there, presumably naked in this thought experiment, and you're about to put on a heavy, scratchy, multi-pound wool blanket. If you wrap that wool directly against your skin, two things will happen. First, you will sweat profusely. That sweat will soak into the expensive wool you just spent hours cleaning with urine, making it smell terrible and necessitating another trip to the fuller much sooner than you'd like. Second, the wool will chafe. After 3 hours of walking in the forum, your nipples and armpits will feel like they've been scrubbed with sandpaper. So, you need a base layer. You need the tunica. You walk into a smaller shop, a draper's stall tucked under the awning of a larger building. It's quieter here, the fabric's lighter and airier. You pick up a piece of linen. It's cool to the touch, woven from flax. This is the unsung hero of Roman fashion. While the toga gets all the statues and the glory, the tunic is doing the real work. It is the t-shirt and underwear of the ancient world rolled into one. You pull the tunic over your head. It's simple, essentially 2 rectangles of cloth sewn together at the sides and shoulders, leaving holes for your head and arms. There's no tailoring, no fitted sleeves, no zippers. It hangs loose on your frame, hitting you right around the knees. It feels stiff at first, but you know that linen softens with body heat and wear. It is breathable, wicking the sweat away from your skin before it can ruin the toga. Now you have to belt it. You grab a thin leather strap or a simple cord, the cingulum, and tie it around your waist. This isn't just to keep the fabric from flapping around. It's a crucial tool for adjusting the length. You pull the fabric up through the belt, blousing it over the top until the hem hits exactly the right spot. And here is where you have to be careful. The length of your tunic tells the world everything about you. If you let it hang too long, dragging around your ankles, you look effeminate or lazy, like you're wearing a nightgown in public. If you pull it up too high, exposing your thighs, you look like a labourer, a soldier, or a slave, someone who needs leg freedom to do actual work. As a respectable Roman citizen about to don a toga, you want that hem to hit precisely at the knee, not above, not below. The knee is the sweet spot of civic dignity. There is a quirky historical tidbit about this underlayer. Some ultra-conservative Romans, like Cato the Younger, refused to wear a tunic under their toga. They went commando under the wool, embracing the scratchiness as a sign of their rugged, old-school masculinity. They wanted to show that they were tough enough to endure the friction of raw wool against their bare skin. You, however, are not a masochist, nor are you trying to prove a point about the moral decline of the Republic. You are just trying to get through the day without a rash. So you keep the tunic on. You smooth the linen down. It's unbleached, a natural oatmeal colour. It doesn't need to be white because, ideally, no one is really going to see it. It's just the scaffolding. But there is a subtle detail here. If you were a senator, this tunic would have a broad purple stripe running vertically down the centre of the chest, the latus clavus. If you were an equestrian, a knight of the business class, the stripe would be narrow, the angustus clavus. Historians still argue about exactly how these stripes were woven. Were they painted on? Were they woven into the fabric itself? Or were they separate ribbons sewn on later? The general consensus leans toward them being woven in, which meant you couldn't just upgrade your tunic if you got a promotion. You had to buy a whole new wardrobe. It's a brilliant, ancient upselling strategy. But for our purposes today, let's assume you are just a standard, well-to-do citizen. No purple stripes, just plain high-quality linen. You adjust the belt one last time, making sure the blousing is even all the way around. You roll your shoulders. The linen shifts easily. It feels good. It feels safe. It is the barrier between your fragile biology and the heavy, crushing weight of social expectation that is about to land on your shoulders. You look down at your feet. You are wearing sandals, calce, if you want to be formal. They are laced up the ankle, the leather soft and broken in. You're essentially dressed in the Roman equivalent of shorts and a t-shirt. You could stop here. You could walk out into the street like this and be perfectly comfortable. You would be mobile, cool and practical. But you can't, because you are a Roman citizen, and walking around in just a tunic is considered undressed. It's like walking around a modern city in your boxers and an undershirt. Sure, you are covered, but you aren't dressed. To be seen in public like this would be a scandal. It would signal that you have no shame, no status, and no business being in the city centre. You take a deep breath. You are delaying the inevitable. You look over to the corner of the room where the massive pile of white wool is waiting for you. It looms there, silent and heavy. The tunica was the easy part. It was just clothing. What comes next isn't clothing. It's architecture. It's a soft prison. It's a statement. You signal to your slave, or in this case your imaginary dressing assistant, to bring the cloth over. You can't put it on yourself. That is physically impossible. You need help. You stand up straighter, grounding your feet. You're about to become a monument. The slave approaches, carrying the fabric. And now, for the first time, you see the beast in its entirety. He unfurls it on the floor, and it just keeps going, and going, and going. We need to talk about the shape of this thing. If you ask a child to draw a toga, they will draw a bedsheet, a simple rectangle wrapped around the body. If you ask a costume shop for a toga, they will hand you a rectangle. They're all wrong. If you try to wrap a rectangle around yourself in the Roman style, the corners will drag in the mud, the back will bunch up around your neck, and you will look like a sad, deflated ghost. The Roman toga was not a rectangle, it was a semicircle, or, to be more precise, it was a complex polygon that approximated a semicircle, sometimes with a slice taken out of the straight edge to accommodate the neck. We are talking about a piece of fabric that is roughly 18 feet long along the straight edge and about 6 to 7 feet deep at its widest point. That is an enormous amount of surface area. We are talking about 40 to 50 square feet of heavy wool. You look at the curve of the hem lying on the floor. Cutting this shape required a level of geometry that would make a high school math teacher weep with joy. The Romans didn't have computerized laser cutters. They had shears and chalk. To get that perfect sweeping arc that allows the toga to drape elegantly without bunching, the tailor had to understand the physics of bias. When you cut fabric on the bias, diagonal to the weave, it stretches and curves. When you cut it on the grain, parallel to the weave, it hangs straight. The toga relies on a complex interplay of these two forces. The straight edge, the balteus or upper edge, provides the tension to hold it tight across your chest, while the curved edge, the hem, utilizes the bias stretch to sweep gracefully around your ankles. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact that is often overlooked. The toga was almost certainly woven on the loom as a shape, or at least pieced together with incredibly subtle joinery. Roman looms were vertical and wide, but weaving a single seamless piece of cloth 18 feet long and 7 feet wide, was a technological marvel. It is likely that many togas were actually 2 or more pieces sewn together with stitches so tiny and flat that they were invisible to the naked eye. This was high-stakes sewing. A seam that rubbed or puckered would ruin the line of the drape, and in Rome, the line was everything. You kneel down to inspect the edge of the cloth. There is no fraying. The hem isn't rolled and stitched like a modern t-shirt. It is a selvedge, a finished edge created by the loom itself, or perhaps a woven band added later for weight. This weight is crucial. If the hem is too light, a gust of wind will blow your toga up like a Marilyn Monroe skirt, exposing your knobby knees to the Senate. That would be a career-ending humiliation. Sometimes, small lead weights were actually sewn into the hem to ensure it hung with the proper gravitas. There is a quirky historical tidbit about the colour here. We said it was white, but white is a relative term. The standard toga, the toga virilis, was the natural creamy white of the wool, but if you were running for office, you wore the toga candida, rubbed with dazzling white chalk, which we'll get to later. If you were in mourning, you wore the toga pulla, made of dark, blackish-brown wool. And if you were a victorious general, celebrating a triumph, you wore the toga picta, dyed entirely purple and embroidered with gold stars. Imagine the cost of that. To dye that much wool purple, you would need to crush literally tens of thousands of murex sea snails. You would be walking around wearing the GDP of a small province. But you are looking at a standard citizen's toga. It is off-white, vast and intimidating. Historians still argue whether the shape of the toga evolved over time. In the early Republic, it seems to have been smaller and simpler, more of a practical cloak you could actually fight in. By the imperial period, where we are now, it had bloated into this massive, ritualistic semicircle that made physical exertion impossible. It's the fashion equivalent of a peacock's tail. Completely useless for survival, but incredibly effective at signalling, I have so many resources I can afford to handicap myself. You stand up looking at the slave who is waiting patiently. He is holding one end of the straight edge. He looks at you, you look at him. You realise that once this process starts, you are merely a mannequin. You have to surrender control. You step onto the floor, positioning yourself near the centre of the room. You have to stand still, very still. The geometry of the semicircle is about to meet the geometry of the human body. And if you fidget, the whole equation falls apart. You feel a strange sense of claustrophobia setting in, even before the fabric touches you. You're about to be wrapped. The slave gathers up the fabric. It bunches in his arms, heavy and thick. He walks around you, sizing you up, mentally calculating the angles. He isn't just dressing you, he is engineering you. He needs to know exactly where to place the first anchor point so that 3 wraps later, the final tail lands exactly where it's supposed to. If he starts 6 inches too short, the end will dangle uselessly in mid-air. If he starts 6 inches too long, you'll be tripping over a train of wool. It's a puzzle, and you are the missing piece. You are now a statue. Or at least, you are trying very hard to be one. You lock your knees, settle your weight into your heels, and stare at a point on the wall, just above the slave's head. He is circling you like a shark, holding the bundled mass of wool in his arms, muttering quiet calculations to himself. This brings us to the core philosophy of the toga, calculated asymmetry. Modern clothing is generally symmetrical. Your jeans have 2 legs, your jacket has 2 sleeves. If you draw a line down the centre of a modern suit, the left side mirrors the right. The toga laughs at this concept. The toga is a garment that is designed to be fundamentally, aggressively lopsided. It piles weight onto one side of your body while leaving the other exposed. It creates a silhouette that is dynamic, unstable, and deeply impractical. The slave stops in front of you. He is holding the corner of the straight edge, the upper border of the semicircle. This is the starting point. He holds it up against your body, gauging the length. He drops it, picks it up, adjusts it by an inch, and drops it again. What he is calculating is the lacina. This is the front section of the toga that will hang down from your left shoulder towards your feet. If he makes this initial tail too short, the final fold, the one that eventually locks everything in place, won't have enough tension, and your clothes will fall off in the middle of a speech. If he makes it too long, you will look like you are melting, trailing fabric in the dirt, like a recalcitrant toddler with a security blanket. He decides on the length. He places the bunch of fabric on your left shoulder. The end of the cloth cascades down your chest, over your tunic, dangling down until the tip hovers just above your left ankle. This is the first anchor, and here is a mainstream historical fact that makes this whole process terrifying. There are no buttons, there are no zippers, there are no Velcro straps. The entire structure of the toga relies on friction, gravity, and the desperate hope that you don't make any sudden movements. It is a masterpiece of engineering, where the only fastener is the weight of the wool itself pressing against your body. You feel the weight of that first section settle on your shoulder. It's heavier than you expected. It pulls slightly, urging you to lean to the left. You resist. You have to stay vertical. The slave, let's give him a proper title, because he isn't just a generic servant, is likely a vestiplicus. This is a quirky historical tidbit. Wealthy Romans actually had specialized slaves whose sole job title was the cloth folder. These men were highly skilled artisans. A good vestiplicus was worth a fortune, far more than a general labourer. He was the difference between looking like a senator and looking like a sausage. He knew exactly how the wool behaved in high humidity versus low humidity. He knew your posture better than your wife did. He steps back to eyeball the vertical line. He grunts in approval. The licinia is hanging straight. The selvage edge is facing inward toward your neck. Now he moves to the bulk of the fabric. He is holding the remaining 15 feet of wool bunched up in his arms. He has to pass this massive train around your back. He signals for you to lift your left arm slightly. You comply, feeling like a marionette. Historians still argue about whether the Romans cheated at this stage. Some scholars believe that for the toga to hold its shape for a full day of business, there must have been hidden pins or fibulae, clasps, concealed within the folds, perhaps pinning the wool to the tunic at the shoulder. It makes sense logically. How else could you gesture wildly in the Senate without unravelling? However, purists and art historians point to the statues, which show no signs of pinning. They argue that the vestiplicus was just that good, and the Roman wearer had mastered a specific gliding walk that minimised bounce. You're about to learn that walk, but not yet. Right now, you're just feeling the friction. The wool grabs onto the linen of your tunic. It's like Velcro hooks meeting loop tape. This natural stickiness of the wool is your best friend. If this was silk, you'd be naked by noon. The slave walks behind you, unspooling the fabric as he goes. You feel the draft as the heavy curtain of wool sweeps across your back. He is careful not to let it touch the floor. In your mind, you visualize the geometry. You are a cylinder. The fabric is a spiral. He is wrapping the spiral around the cylinder. But it's not a tight spiral. He leaves a little slack. This is the calculated part of the asymmetry. He isn't just wrapping you like a mummy. He is creating volume. He tugs the fabric down at your lower back, ensuring it dips low enough to cover your calves from behind, but not so low that it drags. You stare straight ahead, resisting the urge to look over your shoulder. You can feel the tension building. Not just the tension in the fabric, but the tension in your own muscles. You are already compensating for the uneven weight. Your right side feels light, exposed, and airy. Your left side feels burdened, warm, and compressed. This is the somatic reality of being a Roman. You are physically unbalanced. The slave rounds the corner, appearing on your right side. He is now holding the remainder of the toga, still a massive amount of cloth. He pauses. This is the danger zone. The fabric has to cross your body again. It has to go from under your right arm, across your chest, and up to your left shoulder again. He looks at the fabric. He looks at you. He shakes out the wool, creating a small cloud of dust that catches in the sunlight. He is preparing for the most difficult maneuver in the entire operation, the creation of the sinus. But before he can do that, he has to land the cloth on your shoulder without strangling you. You take a shallow breath. You are learning that deep breaths are a luxury you can no longer afford. The wool is tightening. The asymmetry is locking in. You are no longer a person. You are a bundle of expensive laundry, held upright by social pressure. The slave stands to your right, holding the heavy bundle of the remaining wool. He pauses, looking at your torso as if it were a landscape he needs to traverse. He has already anchored the first end on your left shoulder and swept the vast curtain across your back. Now comes the diagonal traverse. He bunches the fabric together in his hands. He does not spread it out yet, that comes later. For now, he keeps it gathered, a thick rope of white wool. He guides this rope under your right arm. You lift your right arm, your sword arm, your writing arm, your voting arm, to let him pass. This is a moment of liberation. Your right side is suddenly free. The cool air hits your ribcage through the thin linen of your tunic. You wiggle your fingers. You realize that the design of the toga is aggressively biased toward right-handedness. If you were left-handed in ancient Rome, wearing a toga was a daily physical reminder that the world was not built for you. You would either have to adapt to doing everything with your right hand or constantly fight against 18 feet of wool, trying to strangle your dominant arm. The slave pulls the gathered fabric diagonally across your chest. It feels like a heavy sash, a seatbelt made of carpet. He pulls it tight, tighter than you expect. You grunt slightly as the wool compresses your chest. He ignores your discomfort. Tension is the only thing holding this outfit together. If he leaves it loose now, the whole thing will slide off your shoulder the moment you exhale. He guides the bundle up toward your left shoulder again. This is the critical landing. The fabric has made a full circuit around your body and is returning to its point of origin. He heaves the mass of wool up and over your left clavicle. Let's talk about your left shoulder for a minute. Physiologically, it is just a joint, the acromioclavicular joint, to be precise. But in the context of the toga, your left shoulder is the keystone of the entire arch. It is currently supporting the weight of the initial lacinia, the starting tail. And now, piled directly on top of it, the heavy bulk of the main body of the toga. You feel the double layer of dense lanolin-rich wool settling onto your trapezius muscle. It bites in. We are talking about several pounds of fabric concentrating its downward force on a strip of skin no wider than 3 inches. It feels less like clothing and more like a gentle, persistent wrestler trying to pull you to the ground. You instinctively hike your shoulder up to catch the weight. The slave taps your shoulder firmly. Down. You must keep your shoulders level. If you hike your shoulder, you look tense, nervous, un-Roman. You must bear the weight with an illusion of effortless grace. This moment, the piling of the wool onto the shoulder, is arguably the most significant physical sensation of Roman citizenship. It is a mainstream historical fact that Roman boys celebrated their coming of age in a ceremony called the Liberalia, usually around age 14 or 16. On this day, they stripped off the toga praetexta, the boy's toga with a purple border, which served as a magical protection against the evil eye, and donned the toga virilis, the plain white toga of manhood. Imagine that day. You are 16 years old. You have spent your life running around in a light tunic or a smaller, manageable child's toga. Then, on a hot March morning, your father takes you to the forum. You are draped in this massive, heavy, plain white blanket for the first time. The weight hits your left shoulder. It drags you down. It restricts your movement. It is hot, and everyone is watching you. You have to walk to the temple of Jupiter without tripping, without sweating too much, and without complaining. It is a visceral metaphor. Welcome to manhood. It is heavy, it is uncomfortable, and you must carry it with dignity until you die. Back in the room, the slave is fussing with the placement of the fold on your shoulder. He tucks the new layer slightly under the old one, trying to create a friction lock. He rubs the 2 layers of wool together. The microscopic scales of the wool fibers interlock, hook gripping hook. This is the genius of the material. Silk would slide, cotton would slip, wool bites. Historians still argue whether the Romans used hidden helpers at this stage. Some experimental archaeologists suggest that under that heavy shoulder fold, there might have been a small patch of rough leather sewn onto the tunic, or perhaps even a hidden button and loop system to keep the fabric from sliding off the shoulder during vigorous debate. It seems impossible that friction alone could hold it during a heated argument in the Senate. Yet, No surviving statutes show a clasp on the shoulder. The consensus is that the Romans simply developed a toga posture, a subtle, constant hitch of the left shoulder and a slight clamping of the left arm against the torso to keep the pile from migrating. You are starting to feel that posture now. You naturally tuck your left elbow in against your ribs. You feel the fabric bunching in your armpit. Your left arm is now effectively disabled. You can move it, but only sluggishly, fighting against the layers of cloth. Your left hand peeks out from the mass of white, looking small and useless. This aligns with a quirky historical tidbit about Roman symbolism. The left side was often associated with the sinister, the Latin word for left, but in the context of the toga, it was the defensive side. The toga evolved from earlier Etruscan cloaks, which were wrapped to leave the right arm free for a spear or sword, while the left arm was wrapped up to act as a makeshift shield or padding. You are wearing the fossilized remains of a combat uniform. You aren't carrying a shield today, but your left arm is swaddled in so much wool it could probably stop a dull knife. The slave steps back to check the symmetry, or rather, the lack of it. You look in the polished bronze mirror he holds up. You look lopsided. Your left side is a mountain of white contours. Your right side is a sleek slope of linen and skin. You look like you are half statue, half man, but we aren't done. The fabric is just draped there. It looks messy. It looks like you just threw a blanket over your shoulder. A toga isn't just about covering the body, it's about drape. It's about the specific, regulated curves of fabric that signal you are a civilized human being and not a barbarian. The slave reaches for the massive loop of fabric hanging down across your chest, the fabric that spans from your right armpit to your left shoulder. It is currently hanging loose, like a droopy necklace. This is raw material. He is about to sculpt the most famous feature of the toga. He is about to create the pocket. You brace yourself. Your left shoulder is throbbing slightly, a dull ache that will be your companion for the next 10 hours. The sweat is starting to prickle on your back where the wool is thickest. You take a breath, but the diagonal strap across your chest tightens, restricting your lungs. You take a shallower breath. That's better. Shallow breaths. Minimal movement. You are getting the hang of it. The slave moves his hands to the chest drape. He spreads his fingers wide, diving into the folds. He is looking for the edge. He is going to pull, tuck and fluff until this chaotic sash becomes a work of art. The slave is now staring at your chest with the intensity of a sculptor inspecting a block of marble. He reaches for that diagonal sash of wool that is currently cutting across your breathing passage, the one stretching from your right armpit up to that overburdened left shoulder. He grabs the upper edge of the fabric and begins to pull it down. He isn't tightening it, he is loosening it. He pulls the fabric out and down, letting it drape in a deep, graceful sway. He feeds more slack into the line, stealing it from the bundle on your shoulder, until the lowest point of the curve hangs down past your waist, hovering somewhere around your right knee. This, my friends, is the sinus. It is the defining feature of the imperial toga. In the old days of the Republic, back when Romans were simpler, harder men who liked cabbage and hated kings, the toga was tight. It was a skimpy wrapper called the toga exigua. It didn't have this loose, billowing fold. But you are a modern Roman. You live in an age of excess, and nothing says excess like wearing 3 extra yards of wool just to create a decorative loop across your midsection. The slave fusses with the curve. It has to be perfect. If it's too shallow, you look like you're wearing a sash. If it's too deep, it looks like your clothes are falling off. It needs to look effortless, like a wave frozen in wool. He tucks the top edge of the fold, rolling it slightly so the rough selve edge is hidden inside. But the sinus isn't just about fashion. It is a masterpiece of ancient utility. You see, your tunic, that linen t-shirt underneath, has no pockets. Romans didn't really do pockets in the modern sense. So where do you put your stuff? Where do you put your keys, your wallet, or rather your purse, your handkerchief, or that snack you might need during a 6-hour filibuster in the Senate? You put them in the sinus. You look down at the deep fold crossing your chest. It's essentially a giant woolen kangaroo pouch. The slave demonstrates this by patting the fold open. It is cavernous. You could fit a whole scroll of papyrus in there. You could fit a bag of gold coins. You could probably fit a small dog if you were eccentric enough. There is a quirky historical tidbit here that is equal parts practical and terrifying. The sinus was the preferred hiding spot for weapons. When you read about senators being stabbed in the forum, the daggers weren't usually pulled from a boot or a belt. They were pulled from the sinus. The fold is so voluminous and chaotic that a curved blade vanishes into it completely. It turns every politician into a potential magician, except instead of pulling a rabbit out of a hat, they are pulling a Pugio out of their laundry. It gives a whole new layer of tension to a handshake when you realise the other guy's hand is resting casually in a pocket big enough to conceal a gladiator's helmet. The slave smooths the fabric down your right side. This is an important function of the sinus. It covers the right thigh. Remember, the toga is open on the right side. Without this big swooping loop of fabric, your right leg would be completely exposed from the tunic down. The sinus acts as a modesty curtain, weighing down the side of the garment so that when you walk you don't flash the populace. He tugs the bottom of the curve. He wants it to hit exactly at the knee level. This creates a pleasing visual symmetry with the hem of your tunic, which is also at knee level, and the hem of the back of the toga, which is lower. It's all about creating layers, a cascade of white lines that guide the viewer's eye up to your face. Historians still argue about the physics of the sinus in relation to the Gallic style. There was a fashion trend in the late Empire where the sinus became so absurdly large and baggy that it had to be supported by the left arm constantly, or even thrown back over the left shoulder to keep it from dragging. Some scholars think this super sinus was a direct influence from Gaulish heavy cloaks, a sign of provincial fashions infiltrating the capital. Others insist it was just the natural evolution of conspicuous consumption, the ancient equivalent of wearing baggy jeans in the 90s. The more fabric you dragged around, the more you showed you didn't need to do manual labour. You try to slip your hand into the sinus. It feels secure, it's warm, it's a natural hand warmer. In fact, keeping your right hand tucked into the sinus across your chest was considered a pose of high politeness and oratorical restraint. It signalled that you were keeping your hands to yourself, literally controlling your gestures. If you were a hothead, your hands would be flailing about. If you were a statesman, your hand was resting in your wool pocket, close to your heart and your dagger. The slave steps back again. The weight distribution has shifted. The heavy pull on your left shoulder is now counterbalanced slightly by the weight of the sinus hanging off the front. It feels a little more stable. The fabric is hugging your torso now, wrapping you in a thick, protective cocoon. But there is a problem. You look down. The sinus is beautiful, yes. It drapes perfectly. But it's not attached to anything at the bottom. It's just a loop hanging from your neck. If you bend over, the whole thing will swing away from your body like a heavy pendulum and knock over a vase. It needs to be anchored. It needs to be tightened. The slave reaches for a section of the fabric that is bunched up near your waist, underneath the sinus. This is the excess fabric from the first wrap, the part that was just wrapped around your waist earlier. He digs his fingers in, finding a specific clump of wool. He looks up at you. You can see the concentration in his eyes. He is about to perform the locking maneuver. This is the move that separates a novice toga wearer from a pro. It involves pulling a wad of fabric up from your waist and tucking it over the sash to create a knot-like structure. It is the keystone of the entire architectural project. You take a deep breath, enjoying the last moments of relative looseness around your midsection. The sinus is currently a loose pocket, but it is about to become part of a tension system. The slave grabs the fabric. He twists it slightly. He is preparing to form the umbo. The slave has his hand buried in the layers of wool at your waist. He is fishing for the specific section of the tunic and toga interface that will serve as the anchor for this entire precarious arrangement. He finds it, the part of the toga that was wrapped around your waist in the very first pass, currently sitting underneath the diagonal drape of the sinus. He grips a handful of this fabric and pulls. He pulls it upward, dragging a clump of the material out from underneath the sash and flopping it over the top edge of the sinus. It forms a puff, a rounded protrusion of folds right in the center of your torso, hovering just above your belly button. This is the umbo. In Latin, umbo means boss or knob. It is the same word used to describe the heavy metal protrusion in the centre of a Roman legionary's shield, the part used to punch enemies in the face. Here, however, the boss is made of soft wool, not bronze. But the metaphor is deliberate. This little clump of fabric is the shield boss of your civic armour. It is the central point of tension, the knot that holds the line. The slave grabs this new puff of fabric and gives it a sharp, practiced tug. You feel the reaction instantly. The entire garment tightens. It's a physical sensation of locking in. The loose sash across your chest snaps taut against your ribs. The heavy weight on your left shoulder is suddenly counterbalanced by the upward pull from your waist. The fabric clinging to your back snugs up against your spine. It's an ingenious piece of engineering. By pulling the bottom layer up and over the top layer, the umbo acts like a friction clip. It prevents the diagonal sash from sliding down your chest. It prevents the hem from dragging on the floor. It effectively replaces buttons, safety pins, and belts with a single, aggressive tuck. You look down at this knot of wool on your stomach. It looks a bit like a chaotic fabric flower, or perhaps a dumpling made of laundry. It's bulky, it sticks out, and that is exactly the point. The umbo wasn't just structural, it was a focal point. It added three-dimensional texture to the front of the garment, breaking up the vast white expanse with a complex landscape of shadows and folds. There is a mainstream historical fact here that really underscores the Roman obsession with drapery. The umbo was used as a secondary, more secure pocket. While the sinus was the deep, cavernous bucket for your scrolls and weapons, the umbo was smaller and tighter. It was the coin pocket of the ancient world. You might tuck a signet ring, a lucky charm, or a few denarii into the folds of the umbo, where the tension would hold them fast. It was the place for things you absolutely could not afford to lose in the mob of the forum. The slave spends a solid 2 minutes just arranging the pleats of this knob. He fans them out, ensuring the curve is pleasing. He tucks the raw edges back inside so only the smooth loops of the wool are visible. There is a quirky historical tidbit regarding the umbo and public speaking. The great orator Quintilian, who wrote the definitive guide on how to be a Roman lawyer, had very specific opinions about this knot. He warned that during a passionate speech, if you flailed your arms too much, the umbo might pop loose. If that happened, the whole toga would lose its tension and start to slide. To prevent this, orators developed a specific gesture, periodically grabbing the umbo with their left hand and giving it a reassuring tug while making a point with their right. It became a tick, a signal of, I am recentering myself. It's the ancient equivalent of a businessman adjusting his tie or buttoning his suit jacket before entering a meeting. It says, I am composed, I am together, my wool is secure. You try it yourself. You place your left hand on the umbo. It feels solid. It feels like a handle for your own clothes. You give it a little tug. The fabric tightens around your waist. It's oddly satisfying, like tightening the straps on a backpack. However, historians still argue about the origins of this feature. Some scholars believe the umbo is actually a vestigial remnant of a time when the toga was worn over the head. In the earlier, simpler styles, you might have pulled the back of the toga up to cover your hair in the rain. When you pulled it back down, the excess fabric had to go somewhere, so you tucked it into your belt. Over centuries, this practical rain hood tuck became stylized, exaggerated, and frozen into the formal umbo we see today, a decorative echo of a practical necessity. Other scholars argue it was purely an aesthetic invention of the imperial court, designed to show off the sheer volume of fabric a man could afford. Look at me, the umbo says. I have so much wool I can afford to bunch a yard of it right here in the middle for no reason. The slave steps back. He circles you again. He is checking the tension lines. He pokes your side, making sure the sinus hasn't collapsed. He adjusts the umbo 1 millimeter to the left. You are now effectively trussed. The feeling is unique. It's not like wearing a suit which hangs off your shoulders. The toga grips you. It wraps around you. You feel swaddled. The pressure is comforting in a way, like a weighted anxiety blanket, but it is also restrictive. You realize that you cannot run. You cannot jump. You certainly cannot fight a war in this. You can barely bend at the waist without risking a catastrophic unraveling. This is the point where the psychology of the toga really sinks in. By wearing this, you are physically demonstrating that you are a man of peace. You are a man of politics, law, and words. You have purposely incapacitated yourself physically to show your status socially. A man in a tunic works. A man in a toga governs. You take a step forward. The fabric moves with you, but there is a lag. The heavy wool swings a second after you move, swirling around your legs. You have to widen your stance slightly to accommodate the bulk. You feel the umbo bounce gently against your stomach. But as you stand there, feeling secure in your wool fortress, you notice something annoying. Your right arm. It's free, yes, but the massive swoop of the sinus and the bulk of the umbo are encroaching on its territory. You try to let your right arm hang naturally by your side, but you can't. The fabric pushes it out. You have to hold your arm at a slight angle, away from your body. You look at the slave. He nods. This is intentional. You're about to discover that even your free arm isn't actually free. It has a job to do. It has a role to play in the theatre of Roman dignity. You thought the folding was done, but now comes the posture training. You have to learn the specific, highly inconvenient way to hold your limb that signals to everyone, I am not just wearing a toga, I am mastering it. You are standing there, looking like a majestic marble column, but you are quickly discovering a frustrating, anatomical reality. Your right arm is technically free. It is the only limb you have that isn't swaddled in multiple layers of wool. But try to lower it. Go ahead. Try to let it hang naturally by your side. You can't. You hit a wall of wool. The massive swoop of the sinus and the protruding knot of the umbo have created a physical barrier at your hip. If you force your arm down, you crush the carefully arranged folds, ruining the aesthetic line and looking like a sullen teenager sulking in a formal suit. So, you are forced to hold your arm out slightly, abducted from your body at about a 20-degree angle. You look like you are permanently carrying an invisible watermelon under your armpit. This is the right arm dilemma. It is the physical embodiment of the phrase too big to fail, but applied to laundry. The toga forces you into a posture of permanent low-grade exertion. You have to keep your elbows slightly bent and your deltoid muscle engaged just to coexist with your own clothes. It's a subtle form of isometric exercise that you will be doing for the next 12 hours. By dinner time, your right shoulder is going to feel like you've been holding a plank, even though all you did was stand around talking about aqueduct maintenance. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact that completely recontextualizes Roman body language. The restriction was the point. The toga wasn't designed to be practical, it was designed to be paralyzing. By wearing a garment that physically prevented you from moving quickly or doing manual labor, you were broadcasting your high status. A man who needs to chop wood, run a shop, or even carry his own groceries cannot wear a toga. He physically can't do it. The fabric gets in the way. So, the invisible watermelon stance is actually a power move. It signals to everyone in the street, I am so important that I don't need to lower my arm. I have slaves to pick things up. I have clients to carry my messages. I exist merely to gesture and to govern. It is the ancient equivalent of having fingernails so long you can't type on a keyboard, a deliberate handicap that proves you are above the drudgery of work. But what do you do with the arm? You can't just let it hover there like a T-Rex. That looks awkward. You have to integrate it into the drape. This leads us to a quirky historical tidbit about hand modesty. In the earlier days of the Republic, and even among the stricter traditionalists of the empire, it was considered incredibly rude to have your right arm swinging free at all. The highest form of politeness was to keep your right hand tucked inside the sinus, completely hidden from view. This pose, the arm in the sling, was the hallmark of a well-raised young man. It signaled restraint, self-control, and a lack of aggression. Imagine the discipline required. You are walking through a crowded, hot city, flies buzzing around your face, and social convention dictates that you cannot swat them because removing your hand from your wool pocket would make you look like a barbarian. You have to endure the itch. You have to endure the sweat trickling down your ribs. You have to stand there, hand tucked away like Napoleon, who, by the way, stole that pose directly from classical statues looking serene while your inner monologue screams. However, you are a modern Roman man of the world, and you likely need your hand to make points. You are entering the realm of chironomia, the art of hand gestures. Since your body is immobile and your face is often too far away for the crowd to see clearly, your right hand becomes your primary instrument of communication. But here is the catch. The toga limits your range of motion. If you raise your arm too high, say to wave at a friend across the forum, the bottom edge of the sinus pulls up, the umbo destabilizes, and the weighted hem at your ankle might lift off the ground, exposing your shins. Flashing your shins is a major faux pas, so all your gestures must be contained. You learn to gesture from the elbow, not the shoulder. You make sharp, precise movements with your fingers, while keeping your upper arm glued to the invisible watermelon zone. Historians still argue about the extent to which the toga influenced the development of Latin rhetoric. Did the Romans develop their punchy, rhythmic style of speaking because they couldn't wave their arms around? Some scholars suggest that the contained style of Roman oratory, stately, grounded, heavy on verbal cadence rather than physical acting, was a direct result of the clothing. If you tried to act out a battle scene while wearing a toga, you'd unravel. So, you had to let the words do the fighting. The clothes literally shaped the language of Western civilization. You experiment with this. You try to point at a distant column. You feel the tug of the fabric across your back. The toga is a web. Pull one strand and the whole thing vibrates. You realize that to move your right arm forward, you have to subtly shift your left shoulder back to feed it slack. You are constantly balancing the tension, a human suspension bridge made of wool. And let's not forget the friction. Your right inner arm is constantly rubbing against the rough wool of the sinus. After a few hours, the inside of your bicep is going to be raw. Experienced toga wearers probably developed a callus there, a patch of toughened skin that was the secret mark of the aristocracy. You, however, are soft. You will likely have a rash by noon. You settle into the pose, right elbow out, forearm slightly raised, fingers curled in a dignified manner. You look the part, you feel the weight, you understand the message. You are a statue in motion. But as you bask in the glory of your frontal view, checking your reflection in the bronze mirror and admiring the swoop of the sinus and the tightness of the umbo, the slave clears his throat. He walks around behind you. Master, he might whisper, if he were allowed to speak freely, don't turn around too fast. Because while the front of you is a masterpiece of complex drapery, the back of you is a potential disaster zone. We have been so focused on the chest, the arm, and the shoulder that we have neglected the massive train of fabric sweeping across your dorsal side. It's hanging there, unseen by you, but seen by everyone walking behind you. And if you don't manage it correctly, you're going to look less like a senator and more like a bride who lost her bridesmaids. You carefully rotate your head, only your head, not your shoulders, to try and catch a glimpse. You can't see much. You have to trust the geometry. You have to trust the slave. You have to trust the dorsal arc. You are now a master of the frontal view. If you were a two-dimensional being, existing only in a flat plane, you would be the most elegant creature in Rome. Your sinus is deep, your umbo is tight, and your right arm is held in that perfect, aristocratic hover. But you live in a three-dimensional world, and unfortunately, people are going to walk behind you. This brings us to the dorsal arc. This is the vast, sweeping expanse of wool that covers your back, stretching from your left shoulder, dipping down across your spine, and curving back up under your right arm. It is the part of the toga you will never see. You can crane your neck, you can use mirrors, you can ask for sketches, but you will never truly know what your own back looks like. You have to operate entirely on faith. You have to trust that the vestiplicus has arranged the pleats so they cascade like a waterfall of cream rather than bunching up like a crumpled tissue. The slave moves behind you. You feel him tugging at the hem. He is calibrating the length. This is a high-stakes game of millimeters. Here is a mainstream historical fact. The length of the toga was strictly policed by social convention. Ideally, the back hem should fall exactly to the heels, just brushing the top of your calci shoes. If it's too short and exposes your calves, you look like a rustic labourer or a soldier who has forgotten he's back in civilization. Showing leg is for people who need to run. You are a Roman citizen. You do not run, you glide. However, if it's too long, you enter dangerous territory. If the fabric drags on the ground, even by an inch, you are signalling something very specific. In the moral language of Rome, a dragging hem meant you were lax. It suggested you were effeminate, luxurious, or perhaps a bit too fond of Greek parties. It was a sign of moral looseness, physically manifested as loose clothing. The satirists would have a field day with you. They would write poems about how your toga sweeps the streets cleaner than the city slaves do. But there is a practical reason for keeping that hem off the ground, one that has nothing to do with morals and everything to do with sanitation. You have to remember what a Roman street actually is. It is not a pristine marble hallway. It is a cobblestone obstacle course covered in mud, animal dung, rotting vegetables, and the contents of chamber pots thrown from second-story windows. You imagine walking through the subura with a trailing hem. The wool is absorbent. It is white. Within 10 paces, a dragging toga would become a heavy brown stinking sponge. It would wick up the filth of the city, staining the fabric permanently and ruining the drape. So, the dorsal arc isn't just about aesthetics. It is a defensive perimeter. It must hover dangerously close to the filth without ever actually touching it. The slave ensures the curve is taut. He pulls the fabric slightly to the left, counterbalancing the pull of the right arm. You feel the tension across your shoulder blades. It's a distinct sensation, like a gentle hug from behind. This tension is crucial because it keeps the fabric smooth. A wrinkly back is a sign of a cheap vestiplicus, or cheap wool. You want the back to look like a solid shell, a carapace of civilization that protects you from the chaos of the world. There is a quirky historical tidbit here regarding the billow. While a dragging toga was bad, a billowing toga was sometimes considered cool, if you could pull it off. There was a specific style called the sinus fluitans, flowing fold, or wearing the toga loosely girded, which became popular among the stylish, artistic set. The ancient equivalent of wearing your tie undone and your shirt untucked. Maecenas, the great patron of the arts and friend of Emperor Augustus, was famous for this. He wore his toga so loose it barely stayed on, signalling that he was so wealthy and secure in his power that he didn't need to look proper. He was the rock star of Roman administration. You, however, do not have Maecenas' money or his connections, so you stick to the rules. You keep it tight. The slave finishes arranging the back. He smooths the wool down over your left hip. This is where the two ends of the toga meet, the initial tail hanging down the front and the final bulk of the fabric draping over the shoulder. They layer over each other on your left side. Historians still argue about how Romans managed the sitting problem. We have thousands of statues of men standing in togas, but very few depictions of the mechanics of sitting down. Think about it. You are wearing a garment that relies entirely on gravity and tension to stay in place. If you sit on a bench, the back hem hits the seat, the tension releases, the pleats get crushed under your own butt. The sinus in the front collapses into your lap. Some scholars suggest that Romans simply didn't sit much when in full formal dress, that the toga was a standing-only uniform, like a royal guard's kit. Others argue there must have been a specific maneuver, a toga hike, where you gathered the back folds and threw them over your shoulder before sitting, similar to how a pianist flips their coachtails. But that seems undignified. The most likely reality is that you just sat on it, crushed the wool, and then had your slave frantically re-drape you every time you stood up. It adds a whole new layer of social anxiety to attending a dinner party. You can never just hop up to grab a drink. Every movement is a logistical operation. You stand there, feeling the air circulate against your calves. The back is set, the front is locked. You are now fully encased in the toga virilis. You take a tentative step. The back fabric swings heavily. It hits the back of your legs. Thump, swish, thump, swish. It has a rhythm. It forces you to slow down. You can't take long strides because the fabric restricts your ankles. You have to take shorter, more measured steps. You are beginning to walk like a statue. But wait. The sky is darkening in our imaginary Rome. A cloud passes over the sun. You feel a drop of rain? No, not rain. That would be a disaster. Wet wool smells like a wet dog, remember? No, it's just the wind picking up. Or perhaps it's a sudden religious procession coming down the Via Sacra. You realise that your head is uncovered. In modern times, we wear hats. In Rome, you don't wear a hat with a toga. That would look ridiculous, like wearing a baseball cap with a tuxedo. But you are a pious Roman. If you pass a temple, or if you need to offer a sudden prayer, you cannot do so with your head exposed to the elements. You need to show humility. You don't have a hood, you don't have an umbrella, but you do have 18 feet of fabric. The slave looks at you and gestures to the massive amount of wool currently piled on your back and left shoulder. Master, he implies, you have a convertible roof installed. You just need to know how to deploy it. We are about to enter the realm of the capite velato, the head covered. It is a variation of the toga wear that turns you from a politician into a priest in one smooth motion. But like everything else with this garment, it is not as simple as just pulling up a hood. It involves shifting the entire tectonic plate structure of the fabric without causing an avalanche. The sky above the imaginary forum is still bright, but let's say the mood has shifted. You are walking past the Temple of Vesta. You smell the burning incense, a sharp, resinous smoke that cuts through the street odours. You hear the chanting of priests. In a modern city, you might just walk past, maybe nod respectfully. In Rome, you cannot simply walk past. You are a participant in the state religion, whether you like it or not. You need to perform a ritual act of piety. You need to pray, or at least look like you are praying. And to do that properly, you need to engage the convertible top mode of your toga. You need to go capite velato with head covered. You stop walking. You plant your feet. You reach back with your right hand, carefully, maintaining that invisible watermelon spacing, and grab the upper edge of the dorsal arc, that massive curve of wool sweeping across your back. At the same time, you use your left hand, which is still mostly trapped in the sling, to feed a little slack from the shoulder bundle. You pull. A thick fold of white wool slides up your back, over your neck and settles onto your head. The world instantly changes. The ambient noise of the city, the shouting shopkeepers, the rattle of cartwheels, the barking dogs, is suddenly muffled. You are now inside a wool cocoon. Your peripheral vision is gone. You can only see what is directly in front of you. The heavy fabric presses down on your ears and frames your face in a stark white oval. This is the cinctus gabinus, or the capite velato look. If you've ever seen that famous statue of Emperor Augustus acting as the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest, looking serene and pious with his toga pulled up over his head, this is exactly what he is doing. He isn't wearing a separate hood, he is wearing the back of his shirt on his head. There is a mainstream historical fact that explains why you are doing this, and it's wonderfully pragmatic. You aren't covering your head to keep it warm, and you aren't really doing it for humility, though that's part of it. You are doing it to create a sensory deprivation chamber. Roman religious rituals were incredibly finicky. They relied on strict adherence to formula. If you were reciting a prayer and you saw a bad omen, like a rat scurrying across the street or two beggars fighting, the entire ritual was voided, and you had to start over. By pulling the toga over your head, you're putting on horse blinders. You are physically blocking out the chaotic variables of the world so you can focus on the altar. It's a way of saying, I am ignoring the reality of the street to focus on the reality of the gods. The sensation, however, is stifling. You are now breathing your own recycled air, mixed with the scent of the lanolin in the wool. Remember that sheep smell from section 1? It's back and now it's intimate. The wool is warm against your cheeks. If it's a hot day, the temperature inside your little hood spikes immediately. You can feel the sweat beading on your forehead, but you can't wipe it away because your hands are occupied holding the fold in place. There is a scholarly debate here that divides the ancient world. Why did the Romans pray with their heads covered, while the Greeks prayed capite aperto, with their heads bare? Plutarch, the ancient biographer, who loved to compare the two cultures, was puzzled by this himself. He theorized that maybe the Romans covered their heads to hide their faces from the gods, out of shame? Or perhaps it was to muffle the sounds of ill-omened words. Modern historians tend to think it was a deliberate branding exercise. The Romans were obsessed with defining themselves as not Greeks. The Greeks were the intellectuals, the artists, the ones who exercised naked. The Romans were the soldiers, the lawyers, the grim administrators. By covering their heads, they were signalling Romanitas, traditional Roman austerity. It was a visual code that said, we do things the hard way, we do things the serious way. As you stand there, capite velato, you notice the structural consequences of this move. When you pulled the fabric up from your back to cover your head, you stole that fabric from somewhere else. The laws of physics apply even to divine garments. You feel a tug at your ankles. Because you hoisted the dorsal arc up, the rear hem of your toga has lifted. You are now exposing your heels and perhaps a scandalous inch of calf muscle to the people standing behind you. The beautiful floor-sweeping line we established in section 10 is ruined. The fabric on your back is now pulled taut, creating a sort of diagonal ramp from your waist to your head. You look less like a majestic column and more like a tent that is slowly collapsing. This is the trade-off. You trade aesthetic perfection for religious correctness. There is a quirky, historical tidbit about the slip. The toga has no elastic. The wool hood is just resting on your hair or your bald spot. If you look up too quickly at the temple pediment, the hood falls off. If you look down too quickly to check your footing, the hood slides forward and blinds you. So, when you are capite velato, you have to move with an almost robotically smooth cadence. You turn your whole body, not just your neck. You become even more rigid. And what if you have intricate hair? In the later empire, elaborate hairstyles became fashionable for men. Curls, piles of ringlets, carefully oiled arrangements. Pulling a heavy wool blanket over your head is a great way to flatten hours of styling. So there was likely a moment of vanity-induced panic every time a procession passed. Do I cover my head and ruin my hair, or do I stay bareheaded and risk angering Apollo? Most chose to anger Apollo. Once the ritual moment is over, the incense has burned, the prayer is muttered, you have to disengage. You reach up and gently slide the fabric back down. This is the unveiling. You feel the cool air hit your sweaty neck. The sounds of the city rush back in, the shouting, the carts, the life. You let the fabric settle back onto your shoulders, but it doesn't fall back perfectly. It never does. The dorsal arc is now bunched up. The pleats are messy. The hem is probably uneven. You are a disheveled mess. If you were a senator, you would now signal your slave, who has been lurking in the background this whole time, to come and reset you. He would tug the hem, smooth the back, and re-establish the drape. But you don't have time for a full reset. You have business to attend to. You are running for office. You need to get to the forum and shake some hands. And to do that, you need to make sure your toga isn't just white. It needs to be blindingly, aggressively, artificially white. You look down at your wool. It looks a bit dingy after the walk. It's natural wool colour. That's fine for a normal day. But today is election day. You need to upgrade your status. You need to become a candidatus. And to do that, you're going to need a bag of chalk and a very high tolerance for dust. You're standing in the shadow of a portico, just off the main thoroughfare. You look decent. Your sinus is draped, your umbo is tight, and you have recovered from the head covering incident with your dignity mostly intact. But looking decent isn't enough. Not today. Today, you are asking for votes. You are running for a magistracy, maybe a quaestorship to handle the treasury, or perhaps the aedileship to manage the public games and sewers. To win, you need to be seen, literally seen. In a sea of thousands of people wearing off-white wool, you need to be a beacon. You need to glow. You signal to your slave. He produces a leather pouch filled with a fine, powdery substance. This is Creta, chalk. It's a specific kind of whitening earth, likely imported from arguably the best chalk pits in the empire. He dips a sponge or the brush into the powder and begins to beat it into your toga. Whoomp, poof, whoomp, poof. Clouds of white dust rise into the air. You squeeze your eyes shut and hold your breath, but the fine particulate finds its way in. It coats your eyelashes. It settles in your nostrils. You suppress a sneeze, which is dangerous because a violent sneeze could dislodge your umbo. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact that is hidden in plain sight in the English language. The word candidate comes directly from this dusty process. A Roman running for office was called a candidatus, literally, the whitened one, or the bright one. The standard toga was the toga virilis, manly toga, which was the natural colour of the wool. The electioneering toga was the toga candida, which was chemically enhanced to be dazzlingly, artificially white. The slave works the chalk deep into the fibres. He focuses on the sinus, the part crossing your chest, because that's where people's eyes naturally fall. He rubs it into the umbo. He dusts your shoulders. You are being turned into a living piece of drywall. The effect, however, is undeniable. When you step out of the shadow and into the hard Mediterranean sunlight, you don't just reflect light, you explode with it. You are blinding. You look hyper-real, a divine figure carved from pure alabaster, walking among mortals made of dingy beige. It's a psychological trick. The brightness suggests purity. It suggests clarity. It implies that there are no stains on your character, because there are literally no stains visible on your clothes. But the sensory reality is less divine and more gritty. You are covered in dust. Every time you move, you shed a little microclimate of chalk. Your hands, which you're supposed to keep tucked politely in your folds, get coated in the stuff. When you shake hands with a voter, a key part of the Roman prensatio, or grasping for votes, you leave them with a ghostly white palm. It's the ancient equivalent of passing out a business card, except you are marking them with your ambition. There is a quirky historical tidbit about this purity ritual that goes back to the early days of the Republic. In the old hardcore times, a candidatus was expected to wear his chalk-white toga without a tunic underneath. That's right, naked under the wool. This wasn't for sexual appeal, it was a resume check. By opening the folds of his toga, a candidate could display the battle scars on his chest and legs. "Look at this gash from the Samnite Wars," he would say. "Look at this stab wound from fighting Hannibal." The scars were his qualifications. By the time of the Empire, where we are now, this practice had mostly died out. Romans had become softer, more modest, and much more fond of linen underwear. You are definitely wearing a tunic today. You have no intention of flashing your appendectomy scar to the plebs. But the idea of the chalk remains. It is a symbolic bearing of the soul, even if you are keeping your body covered. Historians still argue about the extent of this whitening. Was it just chalk? Some ancient sources suggest that fullers used even more aggressive bleaching agents for candidates, perhaps involving increased concentrations of sulfur or even white lead. If so, running for office wasn't just stressful, it was mildly toxic. You were literally poisoning yourself to look electable, which, come to think of it, is a pretty solid metaphor for politics in any era. You finish the application, you check your reflection, you look spectacular. You look like a statue that has climbed off its plinth to walk the earth. The chalk hides the texture of the wool, smoothing it out into a solid block of colour. But now you have to actually do the politics. You have to walk into the forum. And this is where the physical restrictions of the toga become a tool of rhetoric. You approach a group of citizens. They are wearing dirty brown tunics. They smell of garlic and sweat. You stand before them, a towering pillar of white purity. You extend your right arm, keeping that elbow tucked, remembering the invisible watermelon, and offer a greeting. You have to stand perfectly still. You can't slouch. If you slouch, the chalk dust might crack or flake. The toga demands upright posture. It forces you to stand with your chest out and your head high. You physically cannot curl into a ball of insecurity. The wool won't let you. As you engage in small talk, how is the grain dole? Terrible traffic on the Via Appia, isn't it? You realise that the chalk has another side effect. It dries out your throat. The air around you is dry and powdery. You are thirsty, but you can't drink. If you spill a drop of wine or water on a toga candida, it will create a mud spot that will be visible from space. You have to endure the thirst. You notice a rival candidate across the square. He is also glowing white. The two of you lock eyes. Two shimmering ghosts in a dirty city. He looks uncomfortable. He keeps hitching his left shoulder. His umbo looks a little loose. You feel a surge of confidence. Your vestiplicus is better than his. Your folds are tighter. Your chalk is whiter. You are winning the fashion war. But then a gust of wind hits, a real gust this time. You feel the massive sail on your back, the dorsal arc, catch the breeze. The chalk dust swirls around you like a snow globe. For a second you are blinded, you panic. If the toga unwraps now, in front of the voters, while you are covered in white powder, you will look like a clown exploding. You clamp your left arm down. You grab the umbo with your right hand. You hold the line. The wind dies down. The fabric settles. You are safe. You smile at the voters. They look impressed. You have weathered the storm without breaking your silhouette. You are stable. You are Roman. You are ready to give a speech. But giving a speech in a toga isn't just about talking. It's about the stance. It's about knowing how to look majestic while your diaphragm is being compressed by 3 layers of wool. You need to master the art of the rhetorical pose, the calculated drape of the arm, and the ability to look comfortable while you are slowly suffocating. You have survived the shearing, the urine-soaked fulling, the folding, and the chalking. Now, you stand on the rostra, the raised speaking platform in the forum. The crowd is before you. The sun is beating down on your chalk-encrusted wool. It is time to speak. This is the moment of truth. In Rome, public speaking is not just about what you say. It is a full-body contact sport performed in a straitjacket. You open your mouth to deliver your opening line, something punchy and Ciceronian, like cusque tandem abutera, and you immediately discover the central respiratory problem of the toga. You cannot breathe deeply. Remember that diagonal sash, the Balteus section of the toga that crosses tightly from your right armpit to your left shoulder? The one we tightened to secure the umbo? Right now, it is acting like a constrictor snake wrapped around your rib cage. Every time you try to expand your diaphragm for a booming projection, the wool pushes back. It is a physical check on your volume. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact that shaped the sound of Western politics. Roman oratory was physically exhausting. We tend to think of speeches as mental tasks, but for a Roman senator, an hour-long speech was an athletic event. They were projecting their voices outdoors, without microphones, over the noise of a bustling city, while fighting against layers of heavy, restrictive fabric that actively fought their lung expansion. When you read about Cicero sweating, trembling, and looking exhausted after a speech, it wasn't just anxiety. He was essentially running a marathon in a weighted blanket. You adjust your stance. You cannot stand with your feet parallel. That looks stiff and military. You have to adopt the contrapposto pose, weight heavily on your left leg, which is already supporting the bulk of the toga, right leg slightly relaxed and forward. This isn't just for art history majors, it's structural. If you lean to the right, the sinus gapes open. If you lean too far back, the dorsal hem drags. You have to find the geometric center of gravity, where the fabric hangs purely vertical. You begin to talk. Your right arm comes into play. You have trained for this. You know the rules. According to the masters of rhetoric, you must never raise your arm above your shoulder level. To do so would disturb the lay of the hood on your back and make you look like a frantic demagogue. Your gestures must be contained, circular, and waist-high. But here is where the toga becomes a prop. You aren't just wearing it, you are operating it. As you warm up to your subject, perhaps denouncing a corrupt governor or arguing for a new tax on fish sauce, you use the fabric to punctuate your points. You hook your thumb into the sinus, that chest pocket, and pull it slightly. It's a gesture of contemplation. I am thinking, the wool says. Then, as you reach a crescendo, you sweep your right hand outward, letting the edge of the toga ripple. It adds a visual whoosh to your argument. The white wool catches the sun, mesmerizing the audience. You are a magician distracting them with movement. There is a quirky historical tidbit involving the toga wipe. Oratory was sweaty work. The Romans didn't have air conditioning, and you're wearing the fleece of 3 sheep in July. Sweat is pouring down your face. It is stinging your eyes, but you cannot just wipe your face with your sleeve, because you don't have sleeves. And you certainly can't wipe it with the sinus, because that would look gross. So, fashionable orators carried a sudarium, a small linen sweat cloth tucked into their sinus or held in the left hand. It was the ancestor of the pocket handkerchief. But if you dropped it, disaster. Bending over to pick it up is a geometric impossibility without resetting the whole garment. So, you just let it lie there, a small white flag of surrender on the rostra floor. You continue to speak. You feel the umbo, the knot at your waist, slipping slightly. You panic. If the umbo goes, the tension goes. If the tension goes, the shoulder piece slides off. If the shoulder piece slides off, you are just a guy standing in a sheet. So, you employ the tactical adjustment. You pause in the middle of a sentence, looking deep in thought. You frown. You look at the ground, and while the audience thinks you are pondering a profound legal point, you use your left hand to subtly jam the umbo back into your waistband. You retighten the sash, you hike the shoulder, then you look up, inspiration having returned, and continue. Historians still argue about whether the toga influenced the grammatical structure of Latin speeches. Some scholars of rhetoric suggest that the rhythmic, periodic style of Latin oratory, with its long rolling clauses that build to a climax, was designed to match the sway of the toga. You walk across the stage during the build-up. Swish, swish. You plant your feet for the main clause, and you deliver the verb at the end with a final, settling adjustment of the folds. The speech and the clothes moved in sync. A choppy staccato speech would have looked wrong in a garment that moves like a slow river. But as you enter the second hour of your speech, the reality of the situation sets in. Your left shoulder is screaming. The trapezius muscle is spasming under the dead weight of the wool. Your left arm, pinned against your side to hold the bulk in place, has gone numb. You are developing a cramp in your right calf from holding the contrapposto pose. And the chalk. The dust is everywhere. Your throat is parched. You try to swallow, but your mouth is like a desert. You look at the crowd. They are captivated. Or maybe they are just waiting for you to trip. You decide to go for the big finish. The peroration. You need to look majestic. You need to look like the embodiment of the Republic. You throw your right hand out, perhaps a little too enthusiastically. You feel it. A subtle shift, a cooling sensation on your back. The friction lock on your left shoulder has failed. The heavy mass of wool that was piled on your clavicle, the anchor for the entire backside of the toga, slides 2 inches down your arm. It doesn't fall off completely, not yet, but the tension is gone. The sinus sags. The hem drops. The majestic column look is dissolving into melting candle. You freeze. You can't reach over with your right hand to pull it back up. That would look desperate. You can't shrug it back up. It's too heavy. You have to finish the speech while slowly disintegrating. You rush the final sentences. You skip the elaborate closing metaphor about the ship of state. You just want to get off the stage before you are naked. Dixit, you mutter. I have spoken. You step down from the rostra. You try to look dignified, but you are effectively holding your clothes on with your elbows. You make your way through the crowd, your handshakes limp, your smile tight. You need to get to a side street. You need to find a wall to lean against. You have successfully performed the rhetorical stance, but at a terrible cost. The toga has won. It has extracted every ounce of energy you had. And now, as you navigate the crowded streets to get home, the final indignity begins. The structure is no longer just slipping, it is actively trying to escape your body. You are about to experience the slow-motion nightmare of the public unraveling. You have left the relative safety of the rostra and are now plunging into the chaos of the subura. The adrenaline of your speech is fading, replaced by a cold, creeping realization. Your structural integrity is at critical levels. The slide that started on the podium wasn't a temporary glitch. It was the beginning of the end. You are leaking dignity. You try to walk with the gliding gait of a nobleman, but it's over. The massive bundle of wool on your left shoulder, the keystone that holds the back hem up and the front drape in place, has migrated past your clavicle. It is now hovering precariously on your deltoid. Every step sends a shockwave through the fabric, nudging it millimetre by millimetre down your arm. If it drops below the elbow, you are finished. The entire back of the toga will collapse, dragging 5 feet of expensive wool through the Roman street slime. You will look less like a senator and more like a crash survivor wrapped in a blanket. You instinctively clamp your left arm tight against your ribs, trying to pin the escaping wool against your body. You look like you are nursing a broken wing. Your right hand, previously so eloquent and expressive, is now frantically engaged in damage control. You grab the sinus, that chest pocket, and hike it up, trying to artificially recreate the tension that gravity is trying to destroy. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact that is often glossed over in the textbooks. The Romans hated wearing togas. We assume they loved them because they put them on all their statues, but the literary sources are full of complaints. It was heavy, hot, expensive to clean, and required constant vigilance. The poet Martial called it sweaty business. The only people who truly loved the toga were the people who didn't have to wear one. For the actual citizen, taking it off was the best part of the day. You navigate a narrow alley. A donkey cart is coming the other way, laden with amphorae of olive oil. In a tunic, you would just flatten yourself against the wall. In a toga, you are wide. You are a wide load. You try to turn sideways, but the umbo catches on a protruding brick. You feel a tug. Pop. The umbo pulls free from the waistband. The knot unravels. The effect is instantaneous. The sinus, no longer anchored at the waist, drops like a stone. The loop of fabric that was gracefully swathing your chest is now hanging around your knees. You stumble, your sandal catching on the sudden surplus of wool. You do a little hop-skip to avoid face-planting into a pile of horse manure. A group of street urchins giggles. You glare at them, but it's hard to look intimidating when you're holding your clothes up with your chin. This leads to a quirky historical tidbit: the eventual death of the toga. It was so impractical that by the later empire, it was essentially replaced in daily life by the pallium, a simpler Greek cloak, or the dalmatic, a long-sleeved tunic. But the real killer was the lacerna, or the sagum, practical, buttoned cloaks, borrowed from the Gauls and Germans. The irony is delicious. The Romans conquered the barbarians, but the barbarians' comfortable pants and cloaks eventually conquered Roman fashion. You, struggling with 18 feet of slipping wool, understand exactly why the empire fell. It wasn't the Visigoths, it was the laundry. You are now performing the toga dance. It's a rhythmic, desperate twitching of the shoulders. Hitch left, clamp right. Hitch left, clamp right. You are trying to walk and redrape yourself simultaneously. It's impossible. You need a slave, you need a table. You need to stop moving, but the crowd is pushing you forward. Historians still argue about the ubiquity of the toga in the provinces. Juvenal, the great satirist, famously wrote that in a great part of Italy, no one wears the toga unless he is dead. He meant that in the smaller towns and countryside, people couldn't be bothered with this nonsense. They only put a toga on a corpse for the funeral procession, because it was the formal suit of the afterlife. This implies that for millions of Romans, the toga was a mythical garment they saw only on statues or dead relatives, not something they wore to buy bread. But you are in the capital and you are alive, so you suffer. The back hem has officially touched the ground. You feel the drag, it's heavy. The wool is doing its job as a sponge, soaking up the lutum, the mud, sewage and grime of the street. You feel the wetness wicking up the fibres, adding weight to the already heavy load. Your white toga candida is becoming a toga maculosa, a stained toga. You turn the corner to your street. You're almost there. Your left arm is numb from clamping. Your right hand is gripping a wad of fabric at your hip with a death grip. You have abandoned all pretense of the invisible watermelon, or the rhetorical stance. You are just a man trying to get indoors before he becomes accidentally naked. You see your door. It looks like the gates of Elysium. You scramble up the steps, stepping on your own hem one last time, hearing the sickening sound of expensive wool tearing. You don't care. The rip is a problem for tomorrow. The rip is a problem for the vestiplicus. You burst through the door into the atrium of your house. The cool shade hits you. The noise of the street fades. You are home. You stand there for a moment, chest heaving, sweat dripping down your back, chalk dust settling around you like a cloud. You look like a shipwreck. The sinus is at your ankles. The shoulder bundle is at your elbow. The back is brown with mud. Your family is there. They look at you. They don't applaud your speech. They don't admire your umbo. They just see a tired, dirty man wrapped in a ridiculous amount of laundry. You signal to your slave. You don't need to speak. He knows. He approaches you, not with the reverence of the morning dressing ritual, but with the grim efficiency of a paramedic cutting someone out of a car wreck. It is time to shed the chrysalis. It is time to return to the human form. The slave steps forward. He doesn't need to be told what to do. He sees the wreckage. The once majestic toga candida is now a dishevelled, mud-stained heap, clinging to your frame like a failed parachute. He starts at the left shoulder. This is the key. He reaches for the heavy bundle of wool that has been compressing your trapezius muscle for the last 8 hours. With a gentle heave, he lifts it. The relief is instantaneous and overwhelming. It's like setting down a heavy backpack after a 10-mile hike, but better. The blood rushes back into your shoulder. Your arm, which has been pinned against your ribs in a defensive clamp, falls limp. You rotate your shoulder, crack, pop, feeling the joint realign. He pulls the fabric away. The great dorsal arc slides off your back. The weight vanishes from your spine. You feel yourself physically getting taller as the spinal compression reverses. The wool pools on the floor, a white puddle of exhaustion. Next, he attacks the sinus. He unwinds the deep fold from across your chest. The constriction around your lungs releases. You take your first genuine deep breath of the day. Your ribs expand. Oxygen floods your system. You realize you have been shallow breathing since breakfast. Finally, he unhooks the last wrap from your waist. The friction releases. The fabric drops. You are standing in just your tunic and sandals. You look down at your arms. They are covered in faint red indentations, the marks of the wool. You are chalky, you are sweaty, but you are free. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact, the Roman concept of otium. This is the Latin word for leisure, peace, and retirement from public business. It is the opposite of negotium business. Taking off the toga was the physical transition from negotium to otium. It wasn't just changing clothes, it was changing states of being. A Roman in a tunic was a private man. He could drink wine, he could play dice, he could lie on a couch. A Roman in a toga was a public servant, on duty, watched by the gods and the censors. You sit down. Actually, you collapse onto a lectus, a daybed. You rub your face, smearing the white chalk into a grey paste. The slave gathers up the toga. He shakes it out. A cloud of dust and dried mud flies into the atrium air. He folds it. Not the complex ceremonial folding, but a rough storage fold. He will take it to the back to be brushed, and inevitably sent back to the urine tubs of the fullers to start the cycle all over again. But that is his problem, not yours. You look at your tunic. It's damp with sweat, but it's light. It moves with you. You wiggle your toes in your sandals. You reach for a cup of watered wine. You take a drink. It tastes like victory. There is a quirky historical tidbit about the dinner dress. Even after taking off the toga, wealthy Romans didn't just stay in their underwear. For dinner parties, they often changed into the synthesis, a colourful, loose-fitting garment that was basically a silk tracksuit or fancy pyjamas. It was the party toga. You could wear pink, you could wear green, you could spill gravy on it and nobody cared. It was the ultimate rebellion against the white wool tyranny of the morning. But for now, you are happy just to be unravelled. You run your hand over your left shoulder, massaging the sore spot. You think about the day. You survived the folding. You survived the heat. You survived the speech. You survived the walk home. You realise that the toga is the perfect symbol for Rome itself. It is grand, imposing, and technically impressive. It looks beautiful from a distance, but up close, it is heavy, suffocating, requires constant maintenance, and is held together entirely by tension and the sheer will to keep up appearances. Historians still argue whether the toga died out because of Christianity, barbarian influence, or simple laziness. But sitting here, rubbing your sore neck, you know the answer. It died because it was exhausted. It asked too much of the human body. It was a garment for statues, not for men. You close your eyes. The cool air of the evening drifts in through the compluvium, the open roof of the atrium. You hear the fountain bubbling. The city outside is quieting down. The sheep in Apulia are sleeping in their leather jackets. The fullers are washing the urine off their legs. The chalk mines are silent. And you are just a man in a linen shirt, finally blissfully comfortable. So we have reached the end of our journey. We started in the muddy sheep pens of southern Italy, smelling the raw lanolin and hearing the snip of the shears. We waded through the ammonia fumes of the laundry district, watched the chemistry of urine and sulfur turn greasy fleece into gleaming white cloth. We stood still, so very still, while the vestiplicus wrapped us in layers of geometry, tightening the umbo and arranging the sinus until we were less human and more monument. We felt the weight of the empire on our left shoulder. We learned the restricted, dignified gestures of the right arm. We navigated the filthy streets, keeping our hems high and our heads covered, dodging the mud and the moral judgment of our peers. We stood on the rostra, chalk white and breathless, fighting the fabric to deliver a speech, only to feel the inevitable, slow slide of the wool as we walked home. And now the weight is gone. The heavy, scratchy, beautiful burden has been lifted. The tension has left the room. If you are still awake, maybe you are feeling a phantom weight on your own shoulder, a memory of wool that was never there. Or maybe you are just feeling the comfort of your own blankets, which I promise you are much softer and easier to wear than a toga. Take a deep breath, let your own shoulders drop, just like we did in the atrium. Let the tension of your day, your own negotium, slide off you like a heavy cloak. You don't have to hold anything up anymore. You don't have to be a statue. You can just be. The city of Rome is sleeping now. The Forum is empty, populated only by marble figures who never get to take their togas off. But you do. You get to rest. Good night, citizens.